They are playing Ohio State. I thought they were going to draw TCU, but they're not. This is the game I'll be at. Do you have some initial thoughts on this? Because I keep picking up on this talking point that everyone thinks Ohio State just got physically bodied by Michigan again. And I've been at that game 2 years in a row, and I thought it was probably true last year. I don't necessarily know that it was true this year, but the scoreboard looks the same, so people think the same thing happened. I don't think Georgia's just going to physically run Ohio State out of the building. I do lean Georgia to win the game. Where are you on this right now?
Yeah, I thought a couple of weeks ago I was asked Georgia or the field, and I took the field because Ohio State was still included, USC was still included, TCU was included. It's like we had all these offenses that could put up all these points, and I'm thinking, man, if one of these groups gets hot going into the playoff and they make it, then there could be a chance nobody's stopping them. So I've kind of reversed course on that after the SEC championship game. I think Georgia and Michigan are playing the best team football of anybody in the country right now, specifically the teams left in the college football playoff. That offensive line's playing at a high level. I love the ball distribution. As long as Stetson Bennett plays low-risk football, Georgia wins a national championship. And you really have to dive into this, Josh. You have to really go kind of take a close peek at it. There were games in the middle of the season, and I'm not going to accuse him because I'm not inside his helmet. I don't know what he's thinking. He appeared to be a little bit bored to me. There were some throws, go to the Florida game, I know, for example, would be one. There were a couple of others, maybe the Tennessee game, where he just took some chances that normally no quarterback would. Tried to fit some balls in some windows that were just closed, like the blinds were closed, and bounced off defenders' breastplate, bounced off defenders' face mask. Didn't turn into interceptions, but you look at that and say, okay, there could be times down the road that if he attempts to play that kind of football, it could end up being problematic. But then you see games like the SEC championship game when he's super clean and super efficient and not playing high-risk football, and Georgia just looks unstoppable. So I think what I said about Georgia last year is still applicable in a lot of ways, that physically no one can really match up with them across the board. Now, they were a little more of this last year, but still, when you look at Darnell Washington, you look at Amarius Mims, you look at just different players across the board and what they offer up physically, there are not a lot of teams that can go toe-to-toe with that. Well, then you add elite athleticism. Then you add in a quarterback that can manage, run, direct the offense at a high level, and a defense that has just been smothering people at a high rate. I'm not as afraid of what LSU did through the air as some other people are. I do think it has a chance to be problematic. I'm very interested in a couple of things, like minute details of this game. Georgia off the edge. Can they get home? Because I don't think that middle pressure is as important against Ohio State as it is some other teams. One, the ball comes out really quick. Two, they can hurt you on the perimeter a little bit more than they can in the middle of the field. So C.J. Stroud doesn't rely on stepping up in the pocket as much as a lot of other quarterbacks. It's not that he never does it, but it's not like Joe Burrow in 2019 where he was going to climb balls out, and where middle pressure would affect them a little bit more. We know Georgia's going to be able to affect things in the middle. Can they consistently get things off the edge? I think the Ohio State offensive line's a little bit overrated. I think their tackles are big. And I have this saying that say, look how big. People just see offensive linemen that are 370 or 380, and they think that all of a sudden they're just good. It doesn't work that way. But they are massive, so you at least have to get around them to be able to affect the passing game and the quarterback. I love Cade Stover at tight end. I think he's the most physical football player they have, period. But I don't think they're just going to be able to run the ball at Georgia. Matter of fact, I don't think they have a ton of success running the ball, period. Because Dumas Johnson's really coming into his own, more of a sideline player. I think he can be a guy that helps them in pressure packages as well. But I just think physically, to an extent, they will overmatch Ohio State. It's not going to be hey, we're going to line up and run it 60 times, there's nothing you can do about it type game, or where Ohio State just won't be able to get the ball off. But physically, I do think Georgia will be a problem. And I think their balance on offense is critical. I mean, they're running the ball better right now than they have all year. Multiple tight ends that can hurt you in different ways. They can motion, they can go fast, they can shift. They give you so much to defend. It's not even about how great all their players are on offense. And I thought the SEC championship game was a perfect example. They ran duo, they ran inside zone, they ran split zone, they ran counter, they ran power, they ran end around. and that doesn't even include the screen game that you get to, and then your traditional pass game, and then the quick pass game, the RPO game. It's a lot, Josh, that you have to defend. And I think Ohio State has a couple takeover guys on defense, but collectively, I don't know how great that group is. So I like Georgia. I'm not going to say about 3 touchdowns, but fairly comfortably to get that game against Ohio State.
So you mentioned the different looks and how multiple Georgia's been offensively this year. In some games where they didn't have to be, but it builds to sort of a crescendo where you want to peak at the right time. So Stats and Info here had this excellent stat they pulled up, and I'm so curious how it pans out. So Ohio State pass defense, just statistically they're not great, but defending running backs and tight ends, 3 of the 4 of which are Georgia's leading receivers, and then you got Ladd McConkey. Ohio State pass defense against tight ends and running backs, second in the country. They're like 109 against wide receivers, which is why I think A.D. Mitchell's a very important player in this game. They finally got him back. But here's the other thing. That stuff is statistically in a bubble. It's how you can scheme guys open, and they did it in the SEC championship game. And so there's a difference in you defending a traditional inline tight end that sometimes spills out for a 5-yard out versus what Georgia does with Brock Bowers or versus what Georgia does with Darnell Washington. Also, they're probably more integral in the run game, and you got to honor it a little bit more. So I'm very interested, like when we get midway through the second quarter, is that stat carrying water, or does Bowers have 4 for 72 already, and it's just they're going to do what they normally do?
No, I think also at that point, like you're talking about, defending those certain players. To me, like defending a running back in the passing game, what percentage of that would be checkdowns? I mean, I would assume it would be fairly high just because there are not a lot of teams whose second or third read is going to be the back out of the backfield. And then obviously from a tight end perspective, it's nice to have, but like you said, now Georgia's going to have multiple on the field at the same time, so you don't just have to defend one. And then you have one that is a physical brutality matchup, and then you have another that's a speed and athleticism matchup. So they'll offer different guys in different ways. So that would be fun to watch. I agree. I'm the part of that would make it difficult for me to say would be truly impactful is where's the Georgia running game when that becomes important?
Yeah.
Because if they're sitting on 11 carries for 78 yards and it's early in the game, does it matter? If a back's catching the ball out of the backfield, does it matter if a tight end's truly involved? Because we've seen, like SEC championship game, they went to 19 a lot early. It was like, okay, boom, we're getting him in. But there have been other games, and on my Sunday takeaways, there were multiple times the first thing I typed is, want to see more 19. Wish there were more 19. Force it to 19. Because I want him to be involved. I just think he's that good of a football player. So I'll be interested to see where the running game is, let's say after the first quarter, because I think that dictates how important it is that a tight end receives the ball, has to receive the ball, or a running back is getting involved in the passing game.
Hey, Darnell Washington, he's the 4th leading receiver on Georgia's team right now. He plays at 6'7", 270. What was the average height, weight of offensive tackles when you played?
Oh, not 6'7". Well, we had some 6'6"s, but we did have a couple of big tackles. Like Victor Riley was probably, well, he was probably floating around 340 a lot of the time. Should have been playing 320. So Marcus Curry was in the 330s, I think. Kendall Mack was probably like 315. So I would probably say 6'4 and a half, 318, probably the average, somewhere around there.
No receptions,
he is, first off, he's not 270. When I had him in the spring game 2 years ago, I said, Kirby, is this kid really 270 pounds? He's like, oh, he's 285.
Yeah, he's huge.
And then Jordan said this when we had the Missouri game. The first thing he walked down on the field and said, you do not have an appreciation for Darnell Washington until you see him on the field. And it's crazy because he has offensive tackle shoulders. He has an offensive tackle rear end, but he has like an inside linebacker waist. And he has like a defensive end ankles.
Did you? Oh, the ankles. Dude, the thinness of the ankles is wild. It's like you look at it and say, those ankles are supporting this frame? I'm not going to ask how. I don't know how. But the shoulders is a good point. I never thought about it that way. He's so wide. There's no gut. There's nothing. When a normal person weighs 285, they're mostly not 6'7", but there's just sloppy weight, and there's no sloppiness on him at all.
I looked at Stacy Searles, their offensive line coach, and I said, if you could have him for a year at tackle, how much money could you make him? He goes, I'd make him the richest tackle to ever play the game. He's like, he's that athletic, he's that strong. He said if he would buy into it and become a tackle, he's like, he could be the best tackle to ever play. Like he's that gifted. But you see what he can do there at tight end. I mean, why would you want to move to tackle when people throwing you the football? You're jumping over DBs, you're high pointing the ball, you're stepping on people. And the thing that I love about him, and this was after year 1 at Georgia when we had him in the spring game, I said, Kirby, man, he's like a willing blocker. Like he actually gets out there and tries, which in today's football is almost all you can ask for unless you're Iowa or Michigan or Georgia. Like if your tight end just tries, you're usually pretty happy. And he's like, no, Cole, he takes pride in it. He wants to be good at it. Like he understands hat placement, hand placement. Like he goes and works with the offensive line coach. And that's where he's really improved as a blocker. Like point of attack, he will drive people off the ball. He's really fun in the screen game because he's basically a tackle when he gets out there in space, running over corners and safeties. And he's athletic enough to not be like us fat linemen where he just falls on his face and trips up trying to redirect. So he's a hell of a football player, man. I call him a Vince McMahon first-round draft pick, is where he could go to pro wrestling tomorrow and just have a $1 million career because you just don't get guys that big that can move that way.
Yeah. Guys, thanks for watching Late Kick. Make sure and leave a comment. I love interacting with you. But most of all, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. That's how we keep all of this free.